Hello, street rats. Welcome back to Black Magic Craft. I made something that I'm really excited about. A project that combines a couple different ideas I've been meaning to do for quite some time, but never really had the right opportunity or reason to do it. But before I show you how I did it, I kind of want to explain why I did it, because I know there'll be some questions. I don't even always use a grid. But I do enjoy using a grid from time to time. Hexes are far superior for movement. They just make way more sense for diagonal movement. But I never use them for like fantasy games. It just doesn't look right. It looks too futuristic. Cyberpunk, Starfinder, the hex grid is gonna feel right at home. But why is it round? I've always liked the idea of kind of playing in a little area with a lot of negative space. That's how I've always played, just putting some pillars or terrain down, showing the room. I don't like big, huge layouts, especially on my old game table where I had that recessed black felt area. On this one, I went with the round ultimate dungeon terrain style that was popularized by Professor Dungeon Crafts. It really makes it feel like the space may continue. When it's square, that seems more like a defined space. Put it on a Lazy Susan and spin it around on your game table and everybody can see what's going on. And I really love this zoomed in little style of this is what's taking place right here, right now, not here's the whole friggin' setup. And one last thing I always wanted to do is one with a light up grid. It just never made sense, again, for D&D and fantasy. Sci-fi, I mean, this is perfect. It's awesome. The tiles look good on their own. They have a nice finish, but in dark light, just seeing that hex grid defining the space, love it. If I wanna go a little bit crazy or just fade nicely, I think it's gonna be a very immersive little setup for playing these games. Now you know why I did it. Let's show you how I did it. I've wanted to make something like this for a long time, but never wanted to make the big disc out of foam. I always wanted something more solid and durable. I wanted it to be made out of MDF or plywood, but that meant I never got around to actually doing it because cutting it out would be a bit of a pain in the butt. But I was at my local art supply store and I saw this 20-inch round wooden canvas that was absolutely perfect. Considering the price of plywood these days, it wasn't even unreasonably expensive. The same day I popped over to Michael's and I grabbed any hex-shaped cutters I could find. One of them had multiple 1-inch hexes and seemed like it would be the most efficient one to use. But at this point, I wasn't yet sure what my actual tile material would be. You know, I could use all sorts of stuff: polymer clay, green stuff, air dry clay, or any kind of 2-part putty. They would all work well, but would require a lot of rolling out at the exact same thickness. Since I didn't have one of those pasta type clay roller things that makes everything uniformly thick, I decided against clay altogether. But I had a stack of thin EVA craft foam sheets that I got from the dollar store, and I figured, you know what, this might be the perfect material. Now the cutter was plastic and not sharp enough to actually cut the foam, unfortunately, but it did leave me a really nice clean impression that I could use as a guide to cut out all the individual tiles with a sharp knife. Not only would the individual tiles allow me to space them out so I could light up the grid, it would also make the playable space of each hex slightly larger without actually increasing the hex size, giving minis and player hands a bit more breathing room when moving stuff around on the board. These were really time consuming to cut out, but they'd be even more time consuming to texture. I didn't want to accidentally make too few, but I also didn't want to spend a ton of time making way too many. So I did the math on it of the surface area of that circle, and I needed like 350 or 360 some, I don't remember exactly, so I cut that amount out with a few extras. And I didn't want these to just be plain hexes. I wanted this battleboard thing to look good with the lights off because I wanted the lights to be kind of like a special feature, not to use them all the time. I found using a sculpting tool that had kind of a sharp tip on it, I could easily put in some kind of panel lines, and with another just kind of round blunt circle end, I could make impressions that turned into really great rivets. I wasn't going for a particular style. I wanted generic sci-fi so that this could be used in all sorts of different games. So this board could look like it was in some kind of spacecraft, whether it's new or derelict, or it could be in some kind of futuristic Earth city or alien city or whatever. And I think these simple panels, do that just perfectly, but it would take thousands of impressions and dots and lines to do all these. It was pretty intense.
It's so much cooler looking.
Okay.
And since the plan was to have the light up grid, that meant that I would have to paint these tiles before I applied them. Couldn't just glue them all on and paint them. So I really wanted to make sure I had enough, and I quickly laid them out on the board just to see. And once I felt confident with that, I moved on to figuring out a way to actually handle painting this many small little light tiles. And it seemed to me using some double-sided tape to tape them all down to some foam core was the way to go. Outside, I primed them white and hit them with some silver metallic. It would take a little while for that spray paint to not be tacky so that I could move on to tinting it with the airbrush. So while I waited, I decided to start with the lights. Now's a great time though to tell you about this week's sponsor. My friends at Loot Studios are well known for their awesome monthly packs of miniatures that you can print yourself at home. In 32mm scale for gaming and 75mm scale for display, all pre-supported and with bonus terrain, items, busts, and even adventure modules, it's always been a fantastic value for any type of hobbyist. But September marks their second bundle of their new sci-fi themed subscription. I'm sure those of you playing sci-fi games have already jumped on board. I mean, the minis are good for everything from Stargrave to Starfinder, Cyberpunk to Star Wars, and every non-fantasy game in between. This September bundle, though, it highlights that these bundles aren't just for limited use in futuristic settings. Not everyone plays those. And with the exception of some of the terrain and the heroes, the vast majority of these villains in this bundle will feel right at home in a D&D type game. Say you're running an Avatar-inspired Starfinder campaign. This month's bundle is perfect. But if you're running a D&D game in a jungle setting, maybe you're running something like Tomb of Annihilation, well, these models are going to be just as useful. So if you're one of those people that thought, nah, I don't need sci-fi models, I'm just going to stick with their fantasy bundle, well, you might want to think about it again. At $15 a month, even if you only use some of the minis, it's a wicked deal for any game master. I'll put a link in the description so you can grab this awesome set for yourself. Lights, camera, action. I ordered the cheapest LED tape light set I could find on Amazon and get shipped the next day. It was only $10, but had two important features for this build: non-battery power and a remote to control it. This wood canvas would again prove better than just a solid circle of MDF because it had this nice 3/4 inch recess where I could actually install the lights and hide all the hardware. I did need to notch out a little bit of an area in the rim so I could make the power supply connection accessible from outside. I didn't want it constantly connected. Being able to remove the power cable would make storage a lot cleaner. I also needed to drill a hole for the remote sensor. And I put this right beside the power supply port. This way both of these things could face me as I'm running the game, kind of hiding the power cable from players a bit and giving me access to controlling the lights. Once these were in place, I just had to tape the roll of LEDs as evenly throughout the area as I possibly could. Seriously, for $10 Canadian, it's amazing what you can get now for LED lighting. The painting of the hexes is actually the part of the project I had the most fun with and had the results I'm most proud of. Since they were painted before assembly, this meant I could intentionally do a ton of color variation. I could use all sorts of different tones and undertones covered by the same color filters to finish them off. And when placing them on the board later, I could really randomize their placements. Now it was time to add the plexiglass that would make this project actually work. I was able to find a sheet at Home Depot that wasn't too large, and even better, I found one that had a big crack on one corner. Since I wouldn't need the whole sheet, I asked the lumber associate for a discount and ended up snagging the damaged piece for 50% off, which was not bad at all. My original plan was to frost the inside surface of the plexiglass to diffuse the light, but as it turned out, one of the protective coatings on it was already white, which created a perfect light diffusion. So I just left it on the inner side. This did mean that I couldn't glue the sheet on like I was planning and instead needed to use mechanical fasteners. A few countersunk screws would do the job just fine. This plexiglass was actually pretty thin, less than 1/8 of an inch, but since it was suspended across a circle and securely screwed in place, it was strong enough to remain rigid across the whole thing. All that was left was applying the tiles. This of course took some time, but it was a satisfying process and well worth the effort. The spacing for the lights also provided another benefit in that it gave me some room to correct layout errors that would have been really problematic if I'd been putting the tiles close together. Despite being careful, these hexes were still hand cut and not perfect, but with the large spacing, it really didn't matter. I seriously love the way this thing turned out. Not only did the lighting effects work really well, but with the lights off, the hex tiles still look really good. I honestly couldn't be happier with them. I think I nailed a generic, non-specific sci-fi look, and I absolutely love the color variation across them. I'm excited to use this in our new Cyberpunk campaign, and I'm even more excited to share this project with you. I really hope you enjoyed this video and learned a few things. You can take a bunch of different elements from this build and make it your own. Oh, and before you say it, yes, I absolutely have another smooth unused side, and I could make it double-sided, which I plan on doing at some point. If you like this video, hit the like button and let me know in the comments section below. If you're new around here or watching unsubscribed for some reason, then I suggest hitting the subscribe button so you can catch all of my builds. If you want to grab some tools or supplies for hobbying and help the channel in the process, you can do that by shopping on my essential equipment page on blackmagicraft.ca. And last, if you really like the videos I make, you can help me keep making them by supporting the channel on Patreon. I'd love to have you as the newest member of the Black Magic Craft Fellowship. Cheers.